time that we were looking at children's emotion understanding. So that is kind of getting us thinking a lot about what are the periods in which the child's susceptibility to what's going on in relationships, in close relationships, seems to be really important for the development of emotion understanding. We're still working on that one.
I think we've got a question ready here, but if we've got one over here that the microphone can go to, that'd be great. Let's go with this one first, if that's okay.
Okay. All right. My name is Sarai Dodge, and I have a question about whether there's been any research concerning children who don't respond to emotion normally, like autistic children don't respond to these stimulating environments. Has there been any research looking at that?
Well, my university, in addition to doing a lot of brain imaging, is also kind of autism central. We have what is called the Mind Institute, which is a national center for work on autism and autism spectrum disorders. And so, in fact, I can tell you that there has been a lot of research looking at emotion. The story of autism and emotion is a kind of a different story because their emotional deficiencies, at least deficiencies in emotional understanding, are a byproduct of broader deficiencies in psychological understanding that we think has a lot to do with the challenges that seem to arise very early on in how autistic children perceive what people are like and begin to understand sort of what is the internal psychological world of people. And so, of course, emotion understanding is impaired, but is part of a broader challenge in just understanding what is all that internal network of things going on that cause people to act the way they do. As you can see, we know from the beginning at 6 months that babies are already getting this very non-egocentric awareness that other people have emotions that are different from mine but that I can share. That's about the same time that we think we're beginning to understand that the developmental pathways for children with autism are diverging. So autism is a special case of emotion understanding, and we haven't yet unlocked where that core problem seems to be arising from.
Question over here, please.
Do you think that we could ever be overly sensitive to emotion? Like if you're just sitting there all day, oh my gosh, I think you're feeling this, and I think you're feeling this. Do you think that would ever be harmful in an opposite way for the kids?
Well, I'm absolutely confident that almost any good parenting practice can be abused. and exaggerated. And my wife, who's sitting here, who works with parents of young children all the time, I suspect could come up with some examples of that. Well, I think that part of the challenge here, is helping children understand that their feelings are valid and are worthwhile and are recognized, but so also are the feelings of others. And the core socialization challenge is how do I put my own feelings and needs and desires in the context of a world where other people have equally valid feelings and desires and needs? And the answer is not to say that the child's feelings and needs are any less warranted, but the answer sometimes might be that you cannot have those things satisfied if it means running over the feelings and needs of another child. And that, I think, is where the effective parenting comes in. Did I answer that right?
We'll have 2 more questions. We'll get microphones to people. While you're doing that, I'm going to ask a quick question. You've talked a lot about mothers and hinted at research that might be productive about fathers.
Yes.
What about preschool teachers, or in the context of our faith, primary teachers?
Yes.
What can they do to model what you've talked about?
Yeah. No, when I talk about relationships, I am talking about the relationships on which children depend. When I talk about attachments, I'm talking about attachments to mothers and fathers. But young children quite commonly form attachments to those who are significant figures in their life. You might ask, who is a person that a child can expect to turn to for help when they need it? And that is a person to whom an attachment is likely to develop. So all the things we've been talking about concerning emotion conversation, both its quality and quantity, and earlier on, the development of that intersubjectivity, that sharing of emotion and intention, is something that can occur between a child and really any adult to whom they develop that kind of emotional bond. And I think that can be true of primaries, it can be true of preschool teachers, it can be true of those who are regularly providing care for children. It begins, of course, with parents, both mothers and fathers, who are the first teachers of all sorts of things. And that includes, of course, the teachers of emotion, and emotion in the context of getting along with others.
Okay. Question here?
How does, let's say the mother has more than one child under the age of 3, how does that secure relationship become affected because she has to balance that?
Right.
Especially with the child's moral development, because in some cases the older child is kind of jealous of the new baby.
Yes.
So what's your comments on that?
Well, actually, I should ask some mothers in this group to perhaps offer their wisdom. I think that where most of us grew up with siblings, and part of the rich education provided by sibling relationships is exactly what I was referring to earlier, that education of learning that your feelings and needs are important, but so also are those of another child. And that lesson is nowhere better conveyed, oftentimes, than in a family context. The challenge for a parent, therefore, is how do you communicate at that child's level of understanding, and you've got two children who may be at very different levels of understanding, that kind of message. For an older sibling, it may require understanding that your needs are important, but this is a child with different needs, and that I have to devote some time to them, and you're going to get your special time. If not now, then a little bit later. And indeed, sometimes with a preschooler, you give them a clock, and you let them see that when the hand gets here, this is when mommy's going to be able to have special time with you. For a younger child, it's understanding what their older siblings' feelings are and how that relates to what the child's experience is so that you can begin tutoring emotion understanding in that way too. It's not easy, and that's why this is such an important pursuit, this thing we call parenting.
Last question. Do we have one on this side? Okay. Whoever's got the microphone. The power of the microphone.
Yes, my name is Ann Anderson, and you talked earlier about children even up to 12 being able to go back and teach the emotions. Can we do that with adults?
Well, we can. But part of the story of brain plasticity is that the reason you want to get it right early is that it is both biologically and economically more costly to try to get it right later on. Okay? At times like this, I sometimes like to bring out the story of Amber, who was a child when Janet and I were in Lincoln, Nebraska, who was profiled by our local newspaper because she was suffering from uncontrollable epileptic seizures. And the doctors had concluded that after trying everything else, the only thing they could do that would help her was a hemispherectomy, literally taking out the half of her brain that was diseased in order to let her be released from the seizures. So the newspaper followed her up for a number of years. Amber was a 13-year-old child. And in a dramatic series of stories over the course of a year showed incredibly how the healthy half of her brain over time managed to assume many of the functions that the diseased half had formerly assumed. That's a good illustration of brain plasticity. Now, I got to tell you, you take out half my brain, there's no recovery. I mean, I don't have that kind of plasticity, and that's really the story. So the answer is yes, but it takes more effort because there is more, on a behavioral level, more unlearning to do, and on a neurobiological level, there are more new connections in the brain that you're having to make. Now, the good news is that the brain continues to make connections throughout life. The bad news is that as you get older, those connections become increasingly consolidated, and that's why we try to get it right at the beginning. Okay.
Professor Thompson, you mentioned a clock a moment ago, and that's as if on cue. We would like, as an expression of our appreciation, to present you with this clock to help you remember your visit to Brigham Young University. Engraved on the clock are the words, Marjorie Pay Hinckley Lecturer, 2001, Ross Thompson. Please join me in another round of applause for Dr. Thompson.